Why are you making your own video games? It's the thing I've been focusing on a lot lately, and I've seen three major reasons people are doing it, especially when they're starting out. Now, granted, people later career, especially if they've been able to successfully leverage two, maybe even all three of these at once, sure, knock themselves out. For most of us, the reality is we're living in one of these priorities or the other in our near term. And what these priorities tend to look like, out of the hundreds of people that I've trained, are either they are trying to change their career in terms of positioning themselves to be a better applicant for jobs, or perhaps even to set themselves to be a better collaborator for more of a peer partnership or something, but they're trying to move themselves professionally, and that's why they're building projects to make that case. And that's a very different lens and a reason to make games and priority set than if the reason you're making games is because there's a game that you want to make that you'd like to play. And that could be because you feel creatively, artistically driven to see it exist. Like there's a song in your heart you got to get out of you. Like there's a story you got to tell. And that is a different lens, again, than I want to try to get a job working on, just as an example, Halo or World of Warcraft or some other franchise that exists. Nothing wrong with that line, but it's a very different approach to making games in terms of priorities. That's what I'm talking about in today's video. Or option three, which is an equally valid choice, and I've seen plenty of people happily thriving there as well, is purely doing it out of curiosity, to learn, to grow, to enrich themselves. The same reasons why people might take karate classes or dabble in fencing or play club sports. It's just a thing they want to do to grow, right? It's like you want to do woodworking, not to try to sell furniture or outcompete IKEA, but because you're curious, because you like to have skills, because you like to fill in your gaps in your understanding. And that is a different attitude than if the goal is a certain kind of game you're trying to produce, if the goal is a job you're trying to get, if the goal is just you want to learn stuff and have fun, it opens up a lot more variety in terms of the scale, the size of projects you can do, the types of roles you're going to be comfortable filling in, your overall tactical lens. Now, there's a bunch of different strategies I've worked with people on these on. I want to try to at least get a high level blanket, a few different, just poke at ways to see yourself in these categories. And something could be as simple as strategically, right? So if you're aiming for, I'm trying to get a job doing this. And I've had plenty of people who they finished, in some cases, even a college degree related to games. If not comp sci, then literally a game design related grad school or undergrad degree from a reputable school, from a good school, as industry connections and alumni who've been placed and so on, still could not find themselves the work that they needed. And so they came to me and what we do in Home Team Game Dev because they were trying to fill in parts of their portfolio. And obviously my approach is one of many. It's not the only way to do it. It's not the only thing we do. But their role is that they were trying to fill in. They would go look for a job application. They would go look for a job listing, right? And it would indicate here's things that they need. Now, you might know this, but for most of those job listings, in case you haven't heard, it's going to help you hopefully. For all the things they have on those bullets, the amount most companies are willing to pay is not one-to-one with the people who have all of the credentials listed. So the applications coming in, you're not really competing against people who have every single bullet check. Now, you need to have most of them, right? It's going to show. If you have half or a third, well, maybe don't apply, to be fair. Look for a different spot. Maybe that's less contested for that people at experience level. But in many cases, honestly, everyone applying, you're only competing against the other human beings who apply, which means you're trying to check maybe 85% of those boxes. But where this work fits in tactically is if the reason you're building your games is because you want to try to fill in your portfolio examples you can demonstrate of released, finished things, ideally done with a team to show you can cooperate, you can do teamwork, you can work on a vision other than your own, then that's going to be a very different process of trying to design projects around demonstrating those specialization skills. And think of this, right? So let's say there's a gap where I've been looking at job listings. They say they want to be able to show I can do, networked experience in Unity. I can do VR in Unreal. I've done deployment to mobile or something on Android. Well, if that's the case, then that's your primary criteria you're focusing why you're building a project. Now, is the project fun? That's a secondary question. They don't care as the people who are hiring you for it, right? And some people get the wrong idea of like, well, I'm just going to go make a successful solo indie game and then people are going to hire me. People don't want to hire you to work on your thing, right? That's not how that works. They want to hire you to work on their thing. There's a project that they're trying to bring you in as a specialist where what their question is can you do network code? Can you solve our AI optimization problems? Can you fix what's going on in our rendering pipeline with our shader hang up and stuff? And that's a much more specialized role that honestly, one of the things that surprised me my time in and out of AAA and bigger game companies was how many of those people on the team, and this is not a critique about them all, it's going to sound like it really isn't, how many of those people on those teams could not make a game on their own. It's not a negative thing. They might be the best in the world at the thing that they do, but it's so deeply specialized that the way that they can do things is to be part of a much bigger crew. But that's a different approach to doing it than there's a game you're trying to realize that's yours, right? And that's what I'm talking about category B here, where the goal is just you want to make your game. Now, the challenge here for a lot of people is that you want to make your game because it matters to you. You're personally invested in it. It's not one of these things you're trying to check off boxes for a portfolio. You don't necessarily want the job in the industry. Maybe like some other people, you've even heard some of the challenges and downsides and seen the 10,000 layoffs and recognized the game industry is, there's good things about it and there's challenges that come with it. And you've decided your priority is you want your game to exist. And here's a reason to look at this, right? An easy filter on this is if you have somebody else who says, maybe they're players, maybe they're a boss or a manager, they say they think your game should be done this way because more players are going to like it. Well, you can consider that. You'll listen to it. But are you going to feel compelled to act on it if your intuition leads you differently? And if you're looking for the job approach, then the answer is going to be, what does whoever's paying me want done? What does my customer, my client, my consumer, my manager, what do they want to see? What does the lead want from me? My job is to deliver on that. That's why I'm supposed to get paid, because I'm doing their thing their way. On the other lens we're talking about here, A, B, and C, category B here out of the order I'm talking about today in this video, then instead we lean towards, ultimately it's going to be my intuition. And I'm going to listen to feedback. I will hear that, but it also might slide right off it because I am doing something where the pieces connected in a certain way that exists because that's how I think they ought to be done. And again, I'll hear the feedback, but I may not act on it because the priority is how I think it should be done. And it's a bit like if I'm a musician and someone's hearing you play your song and they say, well, I think the note should be like da 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 instead of da da do da da. You're like, well, then find a different song or make your own, right? That's not the only reason for creative artifacts to exist in the world around us. Now, because of that, it can add the challenges to the marketing stuff. We'll get to that in a second, and the running a business and all these other elements to trying to figure out how much you're trying to make this exist as a commercial entity. Because, well, doing your game to exist is maybe separate from, is it anyone's job? Is it your job? Will someone else pay you to do it? Can you, as a publisher, compelled to think that this is a case worth investing in, knowing full well that you might see the world through the lens of your priority is what you feel like, not what a customer feels like. But even more before that, even beyond thinking about those kind of concerns, for a lot of people, the real challenge is they lack the skills yet to do it justice. And this is where I've seen folks who they gave up, they burned out, they didn't get themselves the sort of mentality of this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. It's not like I have an idea and I barf it out and it comes out great and it's exactly how I wanted. What happens is we lack the experience to do justice to the thing that's deep inside us, the story that we need to tell. And we do a bad job of it. It's rough. It's ugly. We can tell it's not working. It's not what I had in my heart and my mind. It's not what I wanted to try to say. And I'm struggling with that. And it leads to a variety of problems. People will either drag it out for years and years and years. They meant to be done in 4-6 months. It's been 3-5 years. Maybe they haven't released yet. Maybe they have released, but they're not proud of it. That's a thing that happens. And so the other approach to this that I've more often worked with people on, again, my approach when I'm doing this with people and in home team game dev, right, which I'm going to allude to several times because that's the context in which I've worked now with hundreds of people on this kind of stuff. I mentioned we've helped people categorize checking boxes in their portfolio to help them maneuver from, I've got some credentials, I haven't found a job yet, how do I do that? But also people kind of build their up to, they have a solo project they want to do, but in order to set themselves up for that, rather than going straight for it, right? You don't go straight to the boss fight and then get frustrated because you didn't win. You level grind first. And so, but it's a different tactical thing. If instead of trying to check off boxes on an application for what have I done and can demonstrate in my portfolio, instead it is, I need to give myself the experience. So by the time I'm doing it in the case that matters to me, my dream game, the thing that I care about, the thing that I'm aiming for, my goal isn't the job somewhere. My goal is this thing needs to exist in the world around me. And I need to be responsible for that. We'll often work people on as a stepping stone process of what's a series of projects that are kind of optimized around instead making sure that by the time you get to where it matters, it's your second, third, fourth draft doing certain kind of things. Handling inventory, handling the type of AI you're going to use, handling the type of map interface, handling the type of whatever the systems are. No matter what, the world is going to try to tell you to do things certain ways. You're going to find good tutorials. Information's out there. They don't sink in until we have the first-hand experience, until we've made those mistakes ourselves. And I've seen this happen for hundreds of people. It happened to me over periods of my career where I didn't believe it until I had tried it myself. But then what gives us that experience, and the reason why experience and seniority are more valuable to a company or a team or to an individual is precisely because we can draw upon, I have seen the threshold for where certain techniques no longer cut it. I have seen the line where I can get away with things up to a certain point. Thereafter, I'm going to regret it and plan things differently. But this is where we get the beginners out of our system on things that are less important, things that we're not so heavily invested in. And the mistake, right, is for people who think that they're going to go straight to, and obviously, not the quitting the day job kind of stuff, but like these things where they're working on it and they realize that in order to get where they're going, they're not just going to be able to make a game and have that game fund the next game, let alone the time they sink into this one. It becomes a matter of how do they sort of, put it another way, subsidize it with some of their day jobs, some of their contract work. And this is more common than people realize. It's something that when I was leading for organizing speakers for Indiecade over the years, a bunch of independent games festivals celebrating people, especially early career. It's a case where a lot of those games were made while they're balancing outside contract work, while they're keeping their day jobs, while they're doing something else, while they have skills on the table. Some of them, and again, this is not a negative at all. That's why I want to say it. We're doing web development because they have the technical skills to do that. They know how to wrangle that. There's business demand for that. And so they have a ratio of their week where they're using that to fund their own IP. And even the game studios who were doing this were still having some fraction of the week given to finding money on the table, bounties for there's some company already successful. They want their game ported. They want their game updated. They want their game having a multiplayer mode added. They want assets made for the game. We have either individually or within a team of us the skills to do that on a contract basis where it doesn't have the high risk of we might see no return or it might take a very long time for this long tail to add up. That is a part of that strategy. But again, it starts from finding a way to maintain that runway long enough to get through those stepping stones so that you're doing projects where you don't feel so invested in. If it doesn't come out great, you're not ashamed of it. You're comfortable releasing it because that releasing experience is also going to be the necessary experience going into your bigger project trying to move towards, to have that sense of what goes into the trade-offs, to recognize what's normal. And is where a lot of my time consulting with people is really much helping situate how much what they're going through is not uncommon, is entirely rational, reasonable, common experience people have, because I see these patterns across a lot of people, but they often only see it in themselves because they're usually pretty isolated. And this is where, even though if the goal is solo development eventually, for a lot of people, they do find it helps them to be for a while on some collaborative environments for a variety of reasons. This is where, again, in home team, just the approach that I teach, people are in teams fundamentally, and it's in part because it's so motivating to wake up and see your game has been moved forward from where you left it. It's so much better than the discouragement that occurs from, let's say 2 weeks pass and I haven't touched my project and I look at it again, it's the same as I left it. That's not a good place to be, versus when you get surprised. And it could be a little thing, could be a nice sound effect, could be a piece of art thrown over the wall, whatever. It can be encouraging. Now, obviously, there's complexity there about how do you sell it? How do you deal with the rights? Who's buying what's rights from who? And that's why in the case of home team, our stuff is freeware because it's for practice, because we know we're working with people on their stepping stones, not on their big solo eventual commercial project. They're keeping rights to their own respective work in our case. So if they want to reuse their sound, reuse their models, reuse their code and future things, they can. But that's a different story for another day about why and how home team's structured that way. Then category C is where I talk about, just for fun and learning, for sustainable. They're curious about it. They don't want a career in it as a job. They also don't want to they also don't want to run a business. Maybe they're familiar with the strategy, this old thing from the E-Myth book I keep referencing. I think it's an old 90s business book about how someone likes to bake. They're a really good cake baker, so they think they should run a bakery. And they realize how much of running a bakery isn't getting to bake cakes, right? It's about having to deal with the books and the accounting and the marketing and the sign and the branding and the website and the customer service complaints and all this stuff that games have their equivalent. It's a little more tangible in the bakery case. But they want to do creative stuff. They want to make things. They want to learn. They want to thrive. And more so than anything else, this is where their goal, when I say it's about enrichment, obviously these other paths involve learning, right? We're talking about checking boxes for a portfolio, for applying for jobs. It's not just some sort of cynical jumping the hoops. It's legitimately, there's gaps in what I knew and had learned and figured out the deals of, now I'm going to learn. And we're talking about stepping stones towards a big solo project or a big future thing you want to realize. There's still absolutely learning happening. But in the case of this third category, I say to have fun and learn, the learning there's a very broad sense, right? It's a very general learning. It is a case of enrichment where it's like, I'm curious to try all the instruments. I know I'm not going to be a concert level pianist with that approach, but I want to know how they work. And this is the difference between if someone is trying to do something as a business, and let's say they want to do their own marketing. I had this discussion earlier today with somebody, and he was talking about, well, he wants to learn how the marketing works. Well, this is valid. As long as what you want to learn from it is you're kind of accepting the tuition of, I want to see more about it, to fill in my own gaps and misunderstandings. You certainly can do that. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to excel at the same level as someone who has spent as much time figuring out that side of things as you have on code, on design, on art, on writing, on the sides of development that you've become more familiar with. And this is also where within the professional context, part of why people tend to need to team up for commercial grade stuff. It's why the studios tend to not be a solo person, notwithstanding a handful of examples you can point to over history. It tends to be something where the customer doesn't care. You don't get brownie points for being a solo person doing it. They don't care if it's 5 people or 50 people or 500 people. They care about, what can I get for my $10? And so you wind up picking a fight where they have budgets of $500K or more, and you'd be lucky to spend several K and even see a return on that, because there's not a lot of space in the middle. There's not a lot of space for people who are just making a game and selling enough just to pay their salary, right? There's games that make millions and millions and millions of dollars, and there's games that are very much not. Hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, in ways that do not justify the years put into it. Anyway, there's a third category of people who realize this, who have figured out, okay, well, I see the challenges of both those paths. I've met enough of their peers who've gone down those paths, and I realize that what I really want out of it is I want to try making Blender animation, right? That feels interesting to me, like doing clay pottery. I want to try composing music. And this is where when it's done for fun and for learning, primarily for the broad learning of skill sets. What it means is that you can do something even if you're not the best at it. So the reason why I brought up this example about the marketing thing, again, it's a case of I'm just doing it because I want to learn how to do it. So in Home Team Game Dev, we have all three of these categories being met in the shared projects in the spaces that we do it. Can we help people navigate these particulars of carving their own paths through this kind of ecosystem of active development that we do in these remote teams. But in category C, this learning for just sort of broad fill-in, it can be, I'm going to do my first Blender model, I'm going to put it in a project. I'm going to do my first level design, put it in a project. And this is where in a bigger company, they won't give you that chance. Even in a small company, it'd be irresponsible to say, well, Tom's mainly a level designer, but he's been trying guitar lately, so he wants to do our soundtrack. Is that going to cause the rest of the team's project and sales to suffer? If so, then you can't actually let that music get used in many cases because it's not a responsible way of handling how that is structured, which is again why in the case of Home Team, it's freeware to take those pressures off. We also find this avoids people exploiting others who think that they're just going to get their game made for them. It's very much a case of everyone is in their hands-on, they're doing it for learning, they're doing it for practice, or to fill in portfolio, or for stepping stones, but it's serving their own needs and goals. And this is such a flip from once you're on the other side of a studio. One reason why we actually have people who are in studio already for their day jobs and still do stuff with us in our groups is because the workplace says you're here to do one specific thing the way we say it needs to be done. And that's so different from the lens we get as students, we get as hobbyists, we get as learners, we get as people in an environment like Home Team or in your own solo projects in your own spare time of just doing your thing your way when you're curious to try a thing to scratch that itch. That's not necessarily usually what the job is, right? The job is you're already good at a thing, you have the credentials, you can prove you can do it. So you're the one who gets to do that, and you don't get to do anything else, and you have to do it the way that the boss says or the customer says, which nothing wrong with that. That's work, that's valid. But it's recognizing there's another space in these where it's just, when Bob Ross shows you how to paint, he's not showing you how to paint for customers. He's not showing you how to sell paintings. Are paintings high or low in sales this year from posters in Walmart? Irrelevant to if you want to make a painting because you want to learn how to paint a tree or paint a mountain. It's more the Bob Ross lens. Anyway, this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. So I recently restructured Home Team Game Dev's site a couple weeks ago to celebrate my birthday. You can check it out. It's going to walk you through that process, including there's a new quiz at the bottom, which you can also get to from whygamedev.com. And it's going to talk you through kind of a little tongue-in-cheek way. When you're playing fantasy games, these D&D RPGs, and they're talking you through which class. Are you going to be stealth or archer based on how you respond to scenarios? I tried to write a little like one of those, just to kind of lighten it up a bit, make it fun. But it's only 8 questions. You'll knock it out in no time. And then based on which ones you pick, you'll actually get a gift from me from my backlog of content about if you're trying to do this more for business, if you're trying to do this more for building your own personal games, if you're just trying to do this for enrichment and learning, you've got a different gift from me for filling out that quiz. So you can find out more about our approaches and patterns at hometeamgamedev.com, or you can jump straight to that quiz at whygamedev.com, WHYGAMEDEV, of course, short for developer, whygamedev.com. Oh, and lastly, I do want to mention, so Home Team, we've been doing this now for 8 years, released over I think almost 200 games by this point. I think our 200th game is already pitched. We've got a bunch of games in development in parallel. Always release them on time. Pretty proud of that. But it is something where the rate for membership will be increasing in January. And the way that this works is our rates never increase for people who are already members, who are already paying dues. So if you can get your application in there, notice, right, there's no cost to apply and there's no obligation when you apply. You could apply and then get accepted and then just ignore the invite. That's fine. There's no harm. There's no loss. It's totally okay to do. But if you want to have that option to get in there at the current rate before the rate goes up, because it's the lowest the rate's ever going to be, the rate is only ever increased over the years as we have more success stories, more examples, more trainers, more materials included, better services, better case stories, all of that stuff accumulates. So we have more value now than people who joined us in 2015 and took a chance on us. If you want to get in there a chance to apply at that rate, get your application there before the rate changes. And even if the rate changes in January after you've applied, the rate that you'd be in at, if you decide to join, is the rate that was on the application you applied. And then lastly, you'll see on the application there is a sponsored process. We do have openings, people who, if they can't afford the dues and the rates, doesn't matter circumstances, you don't have to justify it, you don't have to prove it. We understand everyone has different circumstances, different parts of the world, different life situations. That's okay. There's literally just a checkbox for it. I have a Patreon that some people they don't know the names, it's totally anonymized, but strangers help support a certain number of openings in our community to learn from it. We've seen a lot of great results, people who are able to either move their career forward or move forward their own personal project interests or move forward their learning and fun. And we'd like to make that available to more people. So if you apply, it is okay to check that box if you need it. It's got a longer wait list because obviously the amount of people who apply for not paying dues is greater than the amount of people who pay for covering their own dues. If you can't cover your own dues, we might be able to get you in the next few weeks. If not, it might be a few months, might be several months, depends. It's hard to estimate that. But find out more about the details at hometeamgamedev.com, including, most importantly, guiding through this process of thinking through why are you making your own games and how is it going to affect your lens and your priorities in the years ahead. Anyway, that's it. I hope your year's wrapping up well. Thanks for everybody following along. I'll catch you next time.